The Imus Morning program on the radio all over the country and on the Fox Business Network all over the world. Irshad Manji teaches moral courage at New York University Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. She also is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Trouble with Islam Today. Her new book is entitled Allah, Liberty, and Love, The Courage to Reconcile Faith and Freedom. It's published by the Free Press, available wherever cheese is sold, and books as well. Good morning, Ms. Manji. How are you?
I'm very well, Don. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a privilege.
Jenna, well, you're quite welcome. Jenna Lee recommended you, and I said, well, let's get her on, find what's going on.
Jenna Lee, who, of course, is a co-anchor for one of Fox TV's daytime shows, has become such a good friend. And I would hope that her recommendation is something that after our interview you'll see was a good one.
Okay, well, let's start with, tell me a little bit about your first book, or the book I mentioned that may not have been your first book, but The Trouble with Islam Today. What was that about? What was the trouble with Islam today? What is the trouble with Islam today?
In a word, Don, the trouble with Islam today is us Muslims. And I realize that that might sound incendiary to some ears, but Muslims themselves will be the first to acknowledge, as they have both in public and behind closed doors, to say, you know, Islam can be interpreted in so many ways, and yet it is we Muslims who are keeping it in a 7th century tribal time warp. More of us need to be speaking up about how our faith is being misused, not just by the extremists, Don, that goes without saying, but also by moderates. And I know, again, that's a bit of a shocker to many American ears, but the reality is that moderates are part of the problem, not part of the solution, for one simple reason. You know, in the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. pointed out to tepid people in the civil rights movement, those who wanted to fight segregation but didn't want to go too far too fast. He said to them that, you know, in times of moral crisis, moderation is a cop-out because it just preserves the ugly status quo. And I would argue that MLK was right for his time, and that the same should be said about what is happening within Islam today. What we need in Islam is not more moderates. We need more reformists.
Aren't moderates, though, just mostly afraid?
Sure, they're afraid, but not of death and not of violence against them. They're afraid of being disapproved by their own community. They're afraid of being called sellouts, traitors, you know, people who wash dirty laundry in the backyard. They're afraid of losing their identity. But that's why I say forget identity, because anybody can call you impure and inauthentic if they disagree with you. That's dogma. That's not faith. I say focus on your integrity. Focus on what your conscience is actually telling you, and in that way, you know, be honest before your God. That's why, Don, this book is really, at the end of the day, about moral courage, which is the willingness to speak up when everyone else wants to shut you up.
You know, sometimes I wonder that of all of the Muslims in the world, what percentage, I wonder, and then I ask this question, what percentage of all the Muslims in the world do you think secretly, that's not a goofy question or an inappropriate one, but secretly support, if not terror, at least the sentiments of Al-Qaeda, which I guess would be terror, so.
You know, it's who, quote, secretly support those sentiments, then by definition, because they keep those sentiments secret, you're not really going to know what the percentage is. But let me reframe your question to offer some real hope to your listeners and your viewers. You know, many people ask me, well, okay, if you can't really put a number on those who you know, sort of sympathize with Al-Qaeda, can you put a number on those who are reformists, who want to open up the faith to diversity of thought and to freedom? And this I can't put a number on, at least from my experience. you know, when my first book, The Trouble with Islam Today, came out, and because of the burst of international publicity it received, many young Muslims in the Middle East emailed me to say, when are you going to get the book translated into Arabic so we can share these ideas with our friends? And Don, my standard response to them was, please, name one Arab publisher in this fragile post-9/11 moment that'll have the guts to circulate a book like this. To their credit, most of these kids wrote back to say, so what? You get the books translated into Arabic and post it on your website. And when we can download it as a PDF, that is when we'll be able to share these ideas with our friends. Well, guess what? I took their advice, and just a few years later, we've had more than, and here's where the number comes in, the measurement comes in, we've had more than 2 million downloads in Arabic, in Urdu for the country of Pakistan, and in Farsi for the country of Iran, where, of course, my work is banned outright. And by the way, Don, that's just the downloads. I know from journalists who have emailed me throughout the Middle East that they've often seen the downloads then being further photocopied by young Muslims and circulated even wider. So I hope that actually shows there's a real hunger for how to reconcile faith and freedom within the world of Islam. Not, by the way, that we needed even more evidence since, of course, we're all witnessing the Arab Spring.
How much is this about we're talking with Irshad Manji. Her new book is called Allah, Liberty, and Love, The Courage to Reconcile Faith and Freedom, and she rightly says it is all about courage. How much of this, though, is about the Jews and about America's support of Israel?
Certainly a good deal of it is, at least politically and rhetorically. And many Muslims have said to me, you know, Irshad, if that issue just got resolved, and of course, resolved can be defined in various ways, including wiping Israel off the map, which is clearly not something I support. I support a two-state solution. But those Muslims who say to me, well, if only Israel-Palestine was resolved, everything would be just fine. And I remind them that that's simply not true, that anti-Semitism has run rampant within our religion well before the Jewish state of Israel was created. And in fact, Don, I'll go one step further. I provide research that shows that well before, you know, American imperialism, as many Muslims would call it, well before European colonialism in general took off, we Muslims have been bludgeoning each other's freedoms and declaring martial law on one another. So the point is that we can't keep, you know, sticking our fingers at the outside world and saying, all of you out there are responsible for all of our community's ills, because that's simply not true. We've got to cop to our own crap.
This revolution in Egypt and some of these other countries was widely interpreted by some in this country, in America, to be a move toward democracy. And yet you see then in countries like Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood prevailing. What does that mean?
Well, they actually haven't prevailed yet, and it remains to be seen whether the Brotherhood will prevail. It might. We just don't know, and it would be, I think, premature to say that democracy has failed. We all know, and anybody who remembers, you know, their history about the French, both the French, yes, but also the American Revolution, knows that democracy is a process and not a result, and it takes a lot of courage over, you know, a couple of centuries in order to arrive at, you know, points like the United States has. But one thing, I just want to humanize this Arab uprising for your listeners and viewers, Don. We were just talking about anti-Semitism. You know, I remember being in Cairo in 2005, 6 years ago, at what were then the biggest anti-government demonstrations. And what I saw there was the very opposite of anti-Semitism. I saw love for all kinds of people, and I'll give you a quick example. I hung out with a bunch of democracy activists after one of the protests, and a Muslim woman, probably in her 20s, came up to me to say, Irshad, I know you from the television interviews you've done around the world, and I also know that you give advice to young Muslims. So, you know, I need to tell you, I've fallen in love with a Jewish man, and I don't feel the need to leave my faith of Islam in order to pursue the love of my life, this man. But I don't know how to tell my parents. Can you advise me on how to do that? Don, my point is that this is a generation of pluralists, of people, who love diversity, and they are the ones that we have to keep our eye on, not the older folks who, may still be stuck in some tribal ways. This is a new generation, and that's what Allah, liberty, and love is all about. It's to give them the how to reconcile God with freedom and ultimately with love.
Oh, you know what? Jenna Lee was right.
She always is, Don. She always is.
You're a good guess. Well, I hope your book does well. Thanks for taking the time to appear on the program, explain all this to it. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Hope we can chat again. Cheers to you.
Irshad Manji here. Her book's called Allah, Liberty, and Love, The Courage to Reconcile Faith and Freedom. Y'all buy it at bookstores everywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that sort of thing. 11 minutes now till now.